Hello Battletech and Battletech TCG fans, coming back with another episode of a little build a card. I had a little time before work today and I thought I'd hop on and kind of make this one up because it's a mech that I got requested, and it's a big one that I haven't actually got in my custom set so far, and that is going to be the infamous Archer. Alright, so formerly of the unseen, back to the reseen, but I have some amazing art here by Spooky, and that's FLORIAN, MELLIES, and we're going to dive in here and I'm going to take you through my card design process for the Archer Battle Mech. Alright, so this is the art that I found, and I've actually had this for a little while and been wanting to use it. So this is an Archer, and I'm suspecting this is the Wolf's Dragoons variant, though I don't know off the top of my head which one it is. If you guys aren't familiar with FLORIAN's work, he goes by Spooky777 on most social media, and you can also support him on Patreon here, so definitely kind of consider hopping over and kind of supporting the work of the artists that contribute to the Battletech community. But let's go ahead on over to Sarna and figure out which variant it is that the Dragoons use. There we go. Alright, so the 2W. Alright, so we're going to be doing the 2W, and let's go ahead and pull that up on the master unit list as well. And now there is the Archer Wolf, alright, and so I am interested in kind of building that at some point. I don't know how different it is. I don't remember the actual specs. But the cover from my favorite Battletech novel, Wolves on the Border, has definitely kind of one of my favorite Archer paint jobs. No, definitely the favorite Archer paint job. And so I'm going to figure out a way to get that art without Manubu in the foreground and try to get that into a card at some point in the future. But let's pull this up. And I like to do this just to check faction availability, so confirm that this is definitely just the Wolf's Dragoons variant. And now we're going to hop over to Solaris Skunkworks and pull up the Archer 2W on here. We're going to be needing this for the stats. And so just a quick check here. So we're at 4.6, we're slow, 70 tons. We're going to need that for the armor. We're looking at 10 tons of standard, and the center torso armor is up in the 20s. So that's going to give them a 2 armor, and I'm guessing probably maybe a 5 or 6 for structure. And then a quick look at equipment. Anything unusual there? Nope. Everything looks pretty standard, and so we'll plug that into the spreadsheet in just a moment. But next, let's hop on over to Photoshop. All right, and I have that art pulled up here, so real quick, I'll kind of pull that out and create a thumbnail. All right, we have that trimmed down, and then we're going to transfer it over to the card. All right, and we're going to plug it in here to the template that I have for these cards. Make sure we get that lined up. I'll also kind of get all the little flavor text updated here for you, so let's do that right now. All right, so we got that template clear and ready to kind of put our stats in. All right, so we got Battle Mech Inner Wolf's Dragoons there. We got the main armament set up, and we definitely want to make sure that we're crediting FLORIAN here for his awesome art. All right, so next step, let's go ahead and hop on back over to Solaris Skunkworks and my Excel spreadsheet, and we'll make sure that we get kind of all these stats figured out so that we can plug it into the template. All right, so real quick again, we want to double check this, and so we had 70 ton mech, so that's 7 on the internal. The armor is 10 tons of standard, so it's going to stay at 10 for the value. Generally, if it's a ferrofibrous, I just do the multiplication, and so that's 1.2 for clan and 1.12 for inner sphere. So if that was ferrofibrous for this mech, for clan, I would say it was 12 tons instead of 10, and for inner sphere, it would be 11.2. But we don't need to do that here. Equipment, we got our 2 LRM-20s, 2 SRM-4s, 2 medium lasers. Check that critical real quick. I always like to do that just to see if there's case, because it doesn't always show up. But as suspected, because these guys are pretending to be inner sphere units, there's no case in the 2W here. All right, so we can take that information. Let's go ahead over to the spreadsheet and plug it all in. All right, so this is the spreadsheet that I use to kind of just take my notes on the weapon loadouts. You can kind of get a little preview of what other mechs that I've done there, just kind of sneak that peek. So we have, and then I'm going to fill in here. Basically, I use each of these columns based on whether it's a primary attack, an overheat attack, or anything else like an alpha strike or what I call close quarter combat attack, or maybe even an AP. I might designate that there as well. So, but we have 2 LRM 20s. And then 2 SRM 4s and 2 medium lasers. All right, and now we'll go back and check that against the heat capacity. But first we're gonna do the armor. So we'll plug that in there. And fortunately, once I have most of these mechs done, I don't have to kind of do the math to figure out how much armor, how much structure is going to be there. I can just look at similar mechs. And so the Caesar right above it, it's pretty much the same armor value. So we're just going to plug that to 6 for the Archer. And then we want to go and real quick check its heat capacity or heat mitigation capacity. And we got 10 single heat sinks on this guy. That might kind of prove to be a little struggle later, but we'll figure out kind of how everything bounces out. But usually I'll put that -10 in there. And then let's figure out where the heat is coming from, and I'm sure this guy is going to need to overheat. And so let's kind of confirm that here. All right, so we're back in Solaris Concourse here. I like this because it's really easy to just cross-reference all the heat and the damage for each of these weapons. So we're looking at those LRM-20s. So they're at 6 each. So we're producing 12 heat if we're firing those. And generally we're assuming that the LRMs are firing no matter what every turn, all right, because you want those kind of missiles to get off. 2 LRM-20s is going to give us a missile of 3, so we'll go ahead and kind of plug that into the template in just a moment. But first, let's figure out all these kind of heat. So we're at 12 heat with the LRMs. The SRMs are producing 3 each, and then the medium lasers, of course, are producing 3 each as well. So let's go back to our spreadsheet. All right, so we're back in the spreadsheet. Let's start plugging things in. And so that LRM heat is going to be a 12. And so we're at 12 minus 10. I can't do 12, actually minus 9, 10, because it'll make it into a date. But that's going to be our primary weapon. And then so everything else is going to have to go into our overheat. And so we had 3 heat each generated by 4 different weapons. So we're looking at 12 heat being generated there. And then for the damage, we're going 5 each on the medium lasers. And then for the SRMs, I generally assume SRMs are going to hit at about a 50% rate. I think on the actual hit table, it's slightly above that. And so I won't take that slightly above. I'll use that kind of as a tiebreaker or a rounding consideration if it kind of falls in between. And so we're looking at 8 SRMs, so that's producing 8 damage from that, plus the medium lasers, so we're at 18. All right, so we're looking at 18, and generally I divide the heat by 3, all right, and so we're falling right in between 2 and 3 damage coming out of there. Because we rounded and kind of were conservative with the SRM, we're gonna go ahead and be comfortable rounding up for that. Also with those LRMs, the 40 LRMs, we're coming out with 3 on that, and once you get up past 45 or so, you're kicking up into 4, and so we're also kind of rounding conservatively on that as well. So I think that's going to justify us bumping up to a 3 for that overheat. For the heat there, we're at 12. For the heat, I divide by 5 on each of those, and then we have a 2 carryover heat from the primary, so that's really 14, and then assuming we're going to walk or run, so that's 15, 16. All right, so that's definitely a 3 for the overheat mod. So we're coming out with a overheat 3 plus 3. And then real quick, we can kind of transfer the primary weapons and make sure they're all in the right column. And I do this just so I can go back in my notes if I ever need to tweak, or if I ever kind of come up with an adjustment to my costing formula, I can very easily look at my notes and see what I did in the past and kind of tweak where I need. I've actually had to do that recently with all my overheats because I was dividing my overheat heat by 7. And so it was pushing the overheat damage down a little bit. And I wanted to make sure, once I found out that in the old conventions they were doing it as a multiple of 5, I went ahead and adjusted all my formulas to account for that. All right. But we're looking at a mech with 0 attack because all of its primary heat is going into firing those LRMs, which makes sense because the LRMs are its primary weapon. And then in order to overheat, we're going to add in those short range weapons. All right, let's take that on over to Photoshop and let's plug it into our template. All right, we're back in Photoshop here, and let's just start kind of plugging each of the individual values in. All right, first off, we're slow speed. And we have 2/6 armor, and then that primary attack is going to be 0. Because remember, all that primary is going into the LRMs, but let's go ahead and get that body text pulled up. All right, and now let's edit that text. And so I actually took this template from the dragon, so you can get a little preview of what I did for the dragon. And so we're going to change that to missile 3. And then we are going to have an overheat as well. And so depending on how much fluff text I want to put in there, we'll either do that in the first or second line. All right, and then it's time to kind of go into the flavor text. All right, so let's kind of delete some of this. And we're going to hop on over to Sarna to figure out, kind of read a little bit about this mech and decide what we're going to do for that fluff text. All right, so for this, like I've mentioned in kind of my previous videos, I like to try to, make the fluff text a little tease for the greater universe, and I do try to use that space as much as possible. So on my custom cards, I don't want to leave any extra space because they're all fun, and I kind of want to use the space that's available to me. But we can kind of read through this. So I'll read through this 2W, a little blurb, and then I'll read through kind of some of the original, and I'll come up with a little flavor text, and let's go ahead and cut back over to Photoshop, and I'll show you what I came up with. All right, this is what we got. I'm actually pretty happy with this. So we have introduced in 3010, the 2W was the trademark subvariant of the ARC series used almost exclusively by the Wolf's Dragoons. It was produced in the assembly plant aboard their space station Hephaestus until it was destroyed in 3028 by the Draconis Combined Forces. All right, so that's good. All right, so I always love to do a little flavor text that hints at cool happenings or background in the lore. So mission accomplished with that. And so we're up to the final step in this process, which is the costing. All right, and so for the costing, we're gonna hop over to Michael Cohen's spreadsheet and plug in our numbers there. So we have a slow mech with a 2/6 armor with a 0 primary. Missile is 3. No AP, 3/3 overheat, and let's, I think, get rid of the jump. No jump. All right, so that's putting us 3.8. It's also worth considering that I always ignore the first missile, and so we're gonna bring that down to 2. So that's at a 2.8, all right? So that's pretty close to 3. So I think it's gonna be safe to kind of cost this out around a 3. All right, we have that plugged in, and now we want to consider the buyouts. All right, so the A and M buyouts are going to be definites on this. For the M, it's pretty straightforward. I always just plug a number in for the different kinds of munitions that are used by that mech, so that's going to be a 2. All right, we have that plugged in, and now the assembly for mechs that are generally up in the more than 2 base cost or 3 base cost, that assembly is becoming superfluous because you're assuming that you're going to have some A support assembly down on the board by the time you get to that point. And so whether you have or don't have an A in there is going to be more kind of impactful in the game for mechs that are 1, 2 cost or even 0 cost in the original game. Though for me personally, I don't do any 0 cost mechs per the direction of 1997 world champion Peter Sunholm, which he mentioned in our conversation that 0 cost mechs are a bad idea in the game. And so I kind of took that to heart. But for the assembly on this, we're definitely going to want assembly on this mech. Generally any mech that is currently in production, for the lore sake, I'm going to put an assembly buyout on there. And so for this mech, I'm going to say it's an assembly of 2. And then your other buyout considerations, P, we're definitely not going to do P there. That's kind of a rare case. But we have T. T is generally only if the mech has some special equipment like ECM or Big Galactic Probe or something along those lines. And then the next one is L. Now this mech could be a possibility for L because it's produced on a space station, Hephaestus, so a very unique facility in the inner sphere. So what I might do, what I might consider with this is maybe adding that 1L and then using that and then bumping the base cost down to 2, all right? That might make this a little bit overpowered, and we'll do this kind of in my final step where I'll compare it with some other similar mechs that are in the card game to see if it's either too strong or not strong enough, and we'll kind of play with that in just a moment. All right, so we have that 1L in there, all right? Now, do we do 2, do we do 3? Let's find out. If we do 3, we're not gonna have the L. If we do 2, we are gonna have the L, all right? But what I'll do here is I'll pull out a couple cards that I know are strong in the base game. I'll do a little comparison to see if this mech holds up. All right, so for this last step, I kind of talked about this in my very first episode for this series where I talked more in depth about my process. But what I do is I just grab cards that I know are viable kind of in the primary game. So we've got a bunch here. We have the Grand Dragon, Black Knight, Zeus, Centurion, Fenris Prime, Man of War, Prime, and I'll just kind of compare, do a little comparison between each, and I'll pop it up here on the screen so you guys can see. But looking first at kind of mechs that are costed very similarly. So I'm thinking about maybe bringing this to 2. Centurion D is going to be a good mech to kind of compare it with. And so that has a 4 attack potential, 2 of which is an Alpha Strike. All right, this has overheat 3+3. All right, so that's definitely more powerful than the Alpha Strike, but a little bit less total. Adding that missile in, you're going to average 1 hit on the missiles, but you have a degree of unpredictability there. So this has a potential damage output of 6 versus versus 4 on the Centurion. The Centurion's speed is medium compared to the slow speed on the Archer here, and so that might balance it out. So you could say that these mechs are kind of roughly equivalent. Granted, the Archer does have 2 armor instead of 1 armor, so that does make it a little bit stronger, but the Archer is going to damage itself when it overheats and does that extra damage, whereas the Centurion is not. It's just going to be kind of out of the game for a little bit unless you have someone like the Sharpshooter on there. All right, so roughly comparable there between those two cards. Moving on next to the Fenris Prime, also 3-cost mech with 3 buyouts. The damage potential on that is 3. The damage potential on this is 6, but it's split between overheat and missiles. And this is fast, all right? So you're getting a lot of extra things coming from that fast. So you can get a little bit extra damage, a little bit extra armor, but you're losing 2 speed bands, which is pretty huge, all right? And so at the minimum, this is definitely not going to be a 4. The 3 is definitely justified there, and you might even say because of those missiles being a little bit less predictable and that speed so much different, that might justify coming back down to a 2. All right, and then the next one we're going to pair Man-O-War Prime, and so this one, the Man-O-War Prime's a little bit more protected between that 3-7. All of its attack is going to be into that primary with no risk of overheat. This is at a 5, all right, and so I could do 6 with the Archer, 4 with this, and the speed band is that slow, all right. So between being slow versus medium and then having a little bit less armor, that's going to justify that 2-point loss. And then the question then becomes, you know, what is their rough equivalence of value between Missile 3 and Overheat 3+3 to just a 4 straight base, all right? I would say, yeah, say those are pretty similar in what they can do, all right? Now let's go to the Black Knight. All right, the Black Knight is not as kind of prevalent a mech. It's a very solid unit, but it also has 6 heat or 6 damage that it's putting out there. It has a little bit more structure. It's costed at 5. Its overheat has the same, but instead of 3 as a primary attack, the Archer is having 3 in its missiles. All right, and so is that going to justify kind of bumping the value of it down to? I would say yes, and one of the issues with the costing formula from the original game is the original game would say no. The original game values each missile at 1, whereas it values base attack at 1 for each point as well, and they're not equivalent because you can't rely on the missiles as much as you can on the primary attack, plus the missiles require you to have M in your deck, all right? So is that going to justify 2 less points? It's possible. It's possible. Certainly those that like consistency in the game are going to say yes, all right? And then this last one, which I think is definitely a mech that you're going to see in a lot of games, especially that Davian Starner decks, is going to be the Zeus 9S, all right? And so the Zeus 9S, kind of similar to what we saw before with the Black Knight. So the overheat is 2+2 instead of 3+3. Roughly similar in terms of the value of those things. The speed is the same. The protection between armor structure is more or less the same. And then you have that 3 going from the primary attack to the missiles instead, all right? And so that is definitely going to justify the dropping of the point down to a 3 versus the 4. It might even justify dropping it down to a 2, all right? And so this is going to be kind of a final call. I think we're in a good place with the costing here at 3 with no L buyout, and then we can kind of think and maybe do a little play testing and say, well, is it 2 with an L, 1 L buyout? It's going to be a little bit too powerful, a little bit too easy to get out. You know, time will tell. I would suspect no. All right, so there we go. There's our alternate configuration there. And with that, I think that's it. All right, and so that's kind of this next episode. Hopefully this was nice and short. I tried to be a little bit more concise. Let me know in the comments if you guys kind of liked a little bit more kind of chatting it up through the process while I go, or if you like just kind of, you know, just the facts man kind of format with building these cards. But that's it. That's the Archer. I love that art. This is a very good looking card. I'm gonna enjoy kind of putting this on the table and kind of play testing a little bit, but that's it. Episode 3. This is Travis signing off. I appreciate it. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, guys, if you want to see more like this, and definitely stick around and check out our sponsors because there's some pretty awesome BattleTech stuff that you can kind of pick up there if you're interested from each of those.